It's time for a chat with Pat.
Yes, and today Alexander Raikin is our guest, and he is a visiting fellow in the Bioethics, Technology, and Human Flourishing program at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And he's written an article called Practitioners of Infanticide in First Things, and it's an amazing article. Welcome, Alexander. How are you today?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on, though I wish the conversation and the topic would probably be a bit less depressing, hopefully.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, well, and I think there were so many things that amazed me in this article. I mean, I know, we're all hearing about, these Death with Dignity acts and laws and regulations that are coming through various states. And, but you come right out of the gate talking about a case of infanticide that occurred in 1915. We think about this as a recent issue, but you point out this is not true. Can you give us a little insight into that?
Yes. So this was one of the hardest things to read about because I think we all understood that before Jack Kevorkian, there were other Kevorkians.
Right.
Well, the very first case of a child with disabilities dying in the United States, right, being killed on the basis of their disabilities, was decades before the first abortion bill was passed. It was decades before the first assisted suicide jurisdiction, before the first state that legalized assisted suicide. And it was the case of Harry Hasselden, who was a German-American surgeon, who convinced the parents of a child, and the child's name the child was named Alan, and yet if you read about this on Wikipedia or elsewhere, the child is only described by his last name, the Bollinger baby. Okay. And Harry Hasselden, on the basis of the latest cutting-edge science of the time, which was eugenics, decided that this child was not worth living. And I mean, this would have been a tragedy either way, but what makes it even more tragic in a certain sense was that this child's disabilities were mostly treatable, even by the science of the time.
Yeah.
And yet this child was effectively sentenced to death by Harry Hasselden, and Harry Hasselden then used that case to start essentially a spree of death, including leading to full-on infanticide by administering potentially lethal doses of opioids to other children.
Oh my! I mean, yeah, and when I teach about eugenics, my students are always amazed in the first part of the 1900s. They're like, "What? What was happening?" Like it's been covered up so well. But
right.
I think you go on to talk in this article too about a hospital in Toronto, and Canada certainly seems to be a hotbed of this right now. But you talk about a hospital called, you kind of refer to it as Sick Kids in Toronto. And in the early 80s, 36 babies were killed or died. Can you fill us in on that and where that all came from?
Yeah, so listen, I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm a recovering Canadian. I live in Washington, D.C., but so Sick Kids Hospital is one of the largest children's hospitals in the world. And in fact, just this year, it was rated as one of the best children's hospitals in the entire world.
Wow.
So this isn't a random institution. This is
right.
one of the most important children's hospitals. And this hospital has, throughout its long history, had many, many cases where children with disabilities were effectively being killed on the basis of their disabilities. So what you're talking about is that there were a spree of unsolved murders that happened. Some of those children had severe disabilities. Other children were barely sick to begin with, and yet somewhere up to 36 children and babies were administered with what seems like to be digoxin, which is a medication that's used to control irregular heartbeats, but in large doses is also part of the drug cocktail that is used for assisted suicide. And it seems likely that it was a nurse. The CDC issued a report that tied those deaths to a single nurse, and yet no one was ever convicted for this. Beyond that, it's the reaction from the hospital, right? So, Sick Kids Hospital, the head of cardiac at the hospital, you would think that they would be concerned with those deaths. But if you read the testimony from the physicians and leadership of the hospital, they didn't really care, right? They thought that what was happening, they thought that mercy killing was not even condemnable. If you read like the transcript, they said that they could only almost condemn mercy killing. But we know that some of those children were barely sick to begin with. So it's a fascinating, disturbing example, and this is something that was condemned by many leading voices in the Canadian medical field. And yet, this is the same hospital that also talked about the need to destigmatize euthanasia. And this is a children's hospital. Euthanasia in Canada, or medical assistance in dying, is only legal right now for those who are over 18 years old. And yet, the Sick Kids Hospital, just 2 years after Canada legalized euthanasia, was already talking about the need to destigmatize MAID at their hospital.
Oh, wow. And, the other thing that you bring up in the article is that I didn't realize this in 2019 that Canada made it okay for hospitals to issue DNRs without a patient's, saying, yeah, I want a DNR.
Right. Not even without their consent, but without even their knowledge. So to be fair, this was a court decision in Ontario that hasn't been challenged, and yet, I mean, it's for all the talk about autonomy and choice, it's quite disturbing how even knowledge that a physician put a DNR order on you is considered not pertinent, right? It's weird how the conversation about autonomy only leans one way.
Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned is what we call slow codes, right? That if they don't think that, that life is maybe worth saving, they'll just slowly walk to the room instead of run in there and try to save somebody. It's amazing that our medical community has gotten to this point. And obviously, over a long period of time, it just seems to be more out in the open right now. And you make the case that you're not even sure laws and regulations have that much effect, right?
Yeah. It seems that, unfortunately, we often talk about in the pro-life space about Roe v. Wade. But the reality on the ground is that what happened first was these sort of unsanctioned, illegal killings. Decades before even the first assisted suicide or even the first abortion bill was even being discussed.
Right. Wow, I could talk to you forever about this. Alexander, thank you so much. I encourage people to go to First Things and read this article. Thanks, Alexander. Have a good weekend ahead.
Thank you. You too.